What unfolds when a CEO enters his own warehouse under the cover of night, and his identity remains a mystery? It all began with numbers. Jackson Fuller sat in his office, his gaze fixed on the weekly reports. Warehouse 11, the smallest and newest. Of the 11 storage locations his father had painstakingly constructed, had been underperforming for months. It wasn't alarming enough to trigger immediate concern, but it was enough to gnaw at him. No complaints were received, no customer issues, no staff resignations, just a quiet dip, a slow leak. He had inherited the business 2 years ago after his father's passing. While Jackson had grown up observing the man manage with a keen eye and an even sharper tongue, he always disliked how detached his dad became from the people on the floor. Jackson vowed to approach things differently, yet lately, emails had supplanted conversations and reports had taken the place of visits. He desired to experience the location, not from the perspective of the CEO, but as an unseen presence. Thus, he resolved to go incognito as a night shift trainee. Warehouse 11 operated around the clock, and the night shift consisted of only a handful of individuals managing stock, securing the premises, and logging deliveries. Ideal. He would enter, maintain a low profile, and observe the true situation unfolding. He let his beard grow for 2 weeks, darkening it in the process. He picked up a pair of inexpensive steel-toed boots and a second-hand hoodie featuring a worn college logo. He even created a fake name tag, Josh. No one at Warehouse 11 had ever seen him before. Most of the employees had been recruited by the district manager, and the site manager had only been on the job for 5 months. It was an ideal arrangement. He arrived at 9:45, 15 minutes early. The warehouse sat on the edge of a quiet industrial strip, boxed in by chain-link fencing and the hum of distant trucks. The air smelled like dust and engine oil. A short, tired-looking man in a flannel shirt unlocked the side door and let him in. "You Josh?" the man asked. "Yeah," Jackson nodded, keeping his voice low. "New hire, night training." "All right." The man scratched his neck. "Name's Lewis. I'll give you a tour." Lewis was the night supervisor in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and deep lines under his eyes. He moved like someone who had been in the same role for far too long. There was no smile on his face, but he wasn't rude either, just seemed drained. The warehouse was dimly lit, with bare concrete floors and tall shelves, where a faint echo of movement could be heard. A younger guy named Trent was logging inventory by hand at a workstation, earbuds in. A woman named Carla was sorting damaged goods into bins. That was it, 3 people. Jackson blinked. "Is this the whole night crew?" he asked. "Usually," Lewis replied, "but we've been down a guy for 2 weeks. HR is dragging their feet." Jackson frowned. 2 weeks? Why not fill in with daytime staff? Lewis gave him a look. "They won't touch night shifts, pays the same." That didn't sit right, but he nodded and followed Lewis to the security station at the rear of the building. It was a small room with a wall of old monitors showing grainy black and white footage from different corners of the warehouse. "This is Marvin's post," Lewis said. "He's the night guard. You'll likely encounter him later." Jackson glanced around. He operates solo. It's been nearly a decade now. He may not say much, but his presence is always felt. He noticed the security room was empty, but Lewis dismissed it. He's likely just patrolling the perimeter. He does that every hour, taking it quite seriously. The night dragged on, and Jackson was tasked with assisting Carla in bin sorting. She didn't inquire much. At around midnight, I simply handed him the broken items and indicated which pile they belonged to. She arched her back and whispered to herself, hoping Marvin would step through the door. He consistently brings snacks. Snacks. She mentioned that he prepares these small peanut butter treats that keep us energized. An hour later, Trent came in with a plastic wrapper saying Marv had left these in the break room. Jackson grabbed one. It was a homemade protein bar, simple, just oats, peanut butter, and some seeds, but it really satisfied. He inquired if Marv does this every night, and Trent just shrugged. He's the sole reason this shift remains intact, just before Jackson finally encounters him. He was returning from a perimeter check, flashlights swinging at his side. Marvin stood tall in his mid-60s, with salt and pepper hair and a noticeable limp in his left leg. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert. "Marvin," he said, eyeing Jackson. "Josh," he added, extending a hand. Marvin shook it firmly. "Welcome to the graveyard shift." After that, he spoke little, but Jackson observed how swiftly he moved to check locks, meticulously monitoring the cameras. He even took the initiative to type out a report by hand. After completing a round, though no one had requested it, Jackson felt exhausted, while Marvin continued to walk the aisles, checking shelves, picking up loose tape, and even turning off a fan someone had left running. At 5:15, Jackson finally asked Lewis, "How many hours does Marvin work?" Lewis looked up from his desk. "Officially 8, but he arrives early and leaves late." "Does he get paid overtime?" Lewis let out a dry laugh. "Man, he's salaried, makes what, 32 grand a year?" Jackson froze. 32? "Yeah, he's been stuck at that since before I got here. He asked for a raise once, but the district said no budget." Jackson didn't respond, just nodded and stepped outside into the cold morning air. 32,000 for a man who worked alone, kept the place running, made snacks for his co-workers, and walked with a limp every hour on the hour. Jackson didn't sleep that day. He simply gazed at the ceiling, contemplating how he had allowed this to unfold, pondering how many other individuals like Marvin existed. The following night, Jackson arrived just before 10, clad in the same hoodie and boots, offering the same silent greeting. Lewis barely acknowledged him, engrossed in a clipboard and a half-eaten apple. The atmosphere inside felt colder, heavier, as if the very concrete clung to exhaustion. Jackson peered at the security feed over Lewis's shoulder. Marvin's station was once more unoccupied, presumably out on rounds. He asked Lewis, who nodded absently. Probably he does his own thing. Never. Late never skips. Jackson headed toward the back aisles where Carla was already unpacking a fresh pallet of returns. She looked up briefly, tossed him a box cutter, and went back to work without a word. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the kind of silence that grows when people stop expecting things to get better. At 11, Marvin walked in through the loading bay, wiping his hands with a rag. He'd apparently been helping the delivery driver fix a broken strap on a freight crate no one had asked him to. Jackson watched as he moved to the break room and placed a small Tupperware container on the counter. Carla wandered in a minute later and picked it up quietly. "Thanks." Marvin didn't say anything. Jackson followed him to the far side of the warehouse, where the HVAC units buzzed against the back wall. Marvin was crouched, adjusting the vent casing with a screwdriver. "Is that part of your rounds?" Jackson knelt beside him, saying, "Shana, this thing's been rattling. Blows hot air if it gets loose." He tightened the screws and stood with a slow exhale. "Nobody notices unless it breaks completely. Figured I'd stay ahead of it." Jackson leaned against the wall. "How long you been here?" "Too long to count," Marvin replied, brushing dust off his knees. "Started when this place was just concrete. And promises. They didn't even have the dock doors installed yet. You ever think about retiring?" Marvin shot him a glance as if to say, "Do you really think I'd be out here at midnight if I had the option to stay home?" Jackson found himself at a loss for words. There was no trace of resentment in the man's tone, only a stark reality. His gaze wandered to the shelves, then to the distant corners of the building where shadows gathered. "Ever get the sense that they see everything you do?" Jackson inquired, while Marvin merely shrugged. They reminisced about the days when Dan managed this establishment. He would regularly check in and inquire about the progress. It's been over a year since anyone from corporate has made an appearance. Jackson maintained a composed expression and asked, "Have you ever attempted to report any issues or seek assistance?" "And I did," Marvin said. "Got told we're leaning out operations. Translation, do more with less." There was no anger in him, just a quiet patience, the kind that comes from years of being overlooked. Around midnight, Jackson found himself back near the receiving dock where Trent was wrestling with a pallet jack. One of the wheels had jammed, and he was prying it with a crowbar, muttering under his breath. Jackson crouched beside. "Him need a hand, yeah? If you can find another jack, this one's toast." Trent wiped sweat from his forehead. "We've only got 2 and one's been broken for weeks. Has anyone reported it?" Trent chuckled. "Man, we've emailed maintenance like 3 times. They returned a generic response regarding the backlog of requests, and Lewis didn't pursue it further. So the situation remained unchanged. Jackson stood and surveyed the loading bay, noting the cracked floor panel near the entrance and the flickering overhead light that blinked intermittently. He hadn't noticed these details the previous night, but now they felt more significant, like indicators of a deeper issue. He made his way to the tool cage, a secured area at the back where most of the repair equipment was kept. Marvin was already there, unlocking the gate with a set of keys. "You have access to this?" Jackson inquired. "Lewis gave it to me last year," Marvin replied. "Said I was the only one who didn't misplace tools." Inside, the shelves were sparsely stocked. A box labeled electrical contained only a stripped wire spool and a broken tester. Marvin retrieved a socket wrench set and a replacement wheel, handing them to Jackson. "You planning to fix that, Jack?" Trent asked. Marvin nodded. "He'll need a punch tool. The bearings on those things are welded stiff." As Jackson passed him the tool, he asked, "You ever train anyone?" Marvin replied that they stopped asking, saying it wasn't part of his job description back at the dock. Jackson handed Trent the tools, and the younger man looked surprised. "Where do you find these?" Marvin assisted me as Trent raised an eyebrow. "That guy seems to possess more knowledge about this place than our last 3 supervisors put together." By 2, the warehouse had fallen silent once more. Carla was in the break room, headphones on, enjoying her meal, while Lewis slumped in his chair, half asleep in the office. Jackson and Marvin walked the perimeter, passing a loading bay with a door missing a latch. Marvin paused, knelt down and wedged a piece of metal into the gap. "Temporary fix," he remarked, "keeps the wind out." Jackson gazed at the door, contemplating. "Have you ever thought about requesting a maintenance crew?" Marvin mentioned that they had sent someone once to take pictures, but nothing had changed since then. They had moved on. This time Marvin's limp was more pronounced, yet he didn't slow his pace. Jackson observed him as he scanned the aisles, checked the emergency lights, and noted a loose cable near a shelving unit. "You always this thorough?" Jackson inquired. Marvin shot him a weary look. "You ever work somewhere where one mistake meant someone went home in an ambulance?" he asked. "No," Jackson replied. "Well," Marvin continued, "that's what this place is. One bad pallet, one cracked strap, one person not paying attention. I'd rather lose sleep than see someone get crushed." Jackson remained silent, simply following behind. At 4:30, Marvin returned to the security station and began typing out a report, not on a computer, but on a lined yellow pad. His handwriting was sharp and efficient. Jackson leaned over and asked, "You do this every night, every shift?" "I maintain documentation. There's no digital system, nobody reads them, but I want it on paper anyway. Ever ask for a computer? They said it wasn't necessary, said if I had time to write reports. I wasn't doing enough rounds." The words hit like a slap. Jackson turned away, his jaw tight at 5:15. He walked back to the break room. Carla had finished her shift and was packing her bag. Trent was asleep, head on the table. Jackson sat beside Marvin, who was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. "You ever think about quitting?" Marvin shook his head. "I got a daughter in school, some medical bills if I quit. I lose insurance, can't risk that." Jackson stared at the floor. "You ever meet the owner?" he asked suddenly. Marvin chuckled. "Nah, heard he was some young guy. Took over after the old man passed, never seen. Him, never heard from him. You think he knows what goes on here?" Marvin looked at him, really looked, then he glanced away. "I think he probably gets reports that make this place look better than it is." Jackson didn't speak. The air felt too thick at 45. Marvin stood and stretched, wincing slightly. "You did all right tonight." He remarked that not everyone survives their first week. Jackson nodded slowly, acknowledging the depth of his concern for this place. He inquired if I cared about the individuals involved, to which Marvin responded, "Buildings don't matter. People do." Jackson observed him depart, the limp now more pronounced, the silence around him more oppressive than it should have been. He remained seated long after the others had gone, gazing into the void. A profound change had occurred within him, and he understood that there was no turning back. Jackson did not report for his next shift. The following day, he entered through the front doors at noon, clean-shaven, dressed in a pressed jacket and genuine leather shoes. No hoodie, no name tag. The receptionist at the regional office hardly acknowledged him, merely handing over a folder filled with site performance summaries, oblivious to the fact that he was already familiar with their contents. He walked past her in silence, making his way directly down the hallway to the district manager's office. The door stood ajar as Kyle occupied a sleek desk, fingers dancing over the keyboard, a phone cradled between his shoulder and ear. He offered Jackson a distracted nod, concluding his call. "Didn't expect you today," Kyle remarked, reclining in his chair. "I thought you were heading to Phoenix." Jackson closed the office door behind him and settled into the chair opposite. "I went to Warehouse 11 this week, night shift." Kyle blinked, taking a moment to process. "No, I worked 4 nights during the second week of the month. No one knew who I was." Kyle straightened, curiosity piqued. "Why?" Jackson sidestepped the inquiry. "How long have you overseen that site?" "About 6 months before that." "It doesn't matter who had it before you," Kyle crossed his arms. "Listen, if this is about the numbers, an action plan has already been filed. We've been making waves. This isn't about the numbers," Kyle frowned. "Then what?" Jackson leaned forward. "What caused the facility to be understaffed?" Kyle wondered. "We've experienced some turnover, and securing coverage for the night shift has proven challenging. Many individuals are reluctant to take those hours. Have we considered offering night differential pay?" Kyle seemed uneasy about the situation. "That isn't part of the existing compensation framework. We determine the compensation framework. Certainly, but it remains uniform throughout. Providing additional pay for one location establishes a precedent." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "And who sanctioned the $32,000 salary for Marvin?" Kyle paused once more. "Well, that's the benchmark for site security. He gets paid by the hour. He doesn't work by the hour. He receives a salary. You approved it. I suppose I should take a look at the file." I observed that Jackson's voice was steady and unvarying. He has not received a raise in more than 6 years, and he has recorded more hours than anyone else in history. He has been conducting maintenance work, performing safety checks, and monitoring inventory beyond his designated role. He is training others and drafting manual reports due to the absence of a digital system. Kyle began to speak, but then fell silent. Jackson stood up and stated, "From now on, I want a separate log for night shift incidents, safety maintenance, and staffing gaps. I request an immediate increase of $15,000 in Marvin's salary, along with retroactive pay for the previous fiscal year. I propose implementing a night shift pay differential across all locations, beginning with Warehouse 11. Kyle stood, his expression tense. "The entire compensation model will be impacted by that. We will need to conduct projections. You'll do it today." Kyle appeared ready to protest, yet held his tongue. Jackson began to walk away, but hesitated. "One more thing," he said, not turning around. "You're stepping down from district oversight, effective immediately." Kyle's tone became pointed. "Are you firing me?" "You are not dismissed. You're no longer overseeing individuals." He departed without saying anything else by 4 that afternoon. He returned to Warehouse 11, this time under the bright light of day. Lewis was absent. The day shift had a different supervisor, a young woman named Daria who had never encountered him before. When he introduced himself, using his real name, her expression turned ashen. I didn't know you were coming," she stammered. "I would have, but I'm not here to evaluate you. I need to speak with Marvin," she frowned. "He doesn't arrive until 8. "I know I want to be here when he does," she offered. To show him around, he declined. Instead, he walked the warehouse alone. The same cracked floor panel, the same flickering light, the same feeling that no one had been listening. He found the yellow legal pad in the security room. The handwriting was still there, lines of neatly recorded. Notes times door checks, equipment issues, small things, but consistent. He flipped through the sheets, reading every word. At 8:45, Marvin arrived. He stepped inside, holding a thermos in one hand and a canvas lunch bag in the other. He paused when he saw Jackson standing by the monitors. "You're not Josh Marvin," said quietly. Jackson turned. "No, I'm Jackson Fuller." Marvin didn't react the way Jackson expected. No anger, no embarrassment, just a long, steady look. "You're the owner, I am." Marvin walked over, set his bag down and took a sip from his thermos. "You spent 4 nights out here," he said. "Why? because I didn't trust the reports anymore. Marvin nodded slowly. And now I know we've been failing you. Marvin's eyes didn't leave his. You think I stayed here because I liked being ignored? No. Jackson said I think you stayed because you don't know how to quit on people. Marvin sat in the chair by the monitors, his knee cracking slightly. He didn't flinch. I was taken by surprise at the sight of change. He mentioned that he merely wanted the place to stay intact. Jackson retrieved a folded envelope from his coat and set it down on the desk. A formal contract has been established, resulting in an immediate raise, back pay, and an adjustment to the health premium, effective starting next week. As you step into your new role as Night Operations Safety Lead, you'll find yourself with 2 direct reports and the authority to enforce maintenance protocols. Marvin didn't move. You've truly earned this position, Jackson remarked, while Marvin glanced at the envelope, contemplating what comes next. I'm staying involved, he assured. You'll have a direct line to my office, bypassing the layers of middle management, no more feeling invisible. Marvin's voice softened as he acknowledged the others. They're getting raises too, Trent, Carla, the entire night crew. We're implementing a shift differential and addressing the equipment issues. A new supervisor will be starting next week, someone who values the work being done here. Finally, Marvin leaned back, exhaling slowly. It's about time. He mentioned that Jackson offered a subtle nod. Indeed, the remainder of the crew trickled in over the following hour. Carla blinked upon spotting Jackson in the security room, then tensed as the realization of his identity hit her. Trent dropped his backpack in the break room, standing frozen in confusion as Jackson made his way onto the floor. I prefer something brief. He expressed that he owes everyone an apology. He was the center of their gaze. I believed I grasped what this company required. I believed I could mend things from afar, but I was mistaken. You've been shouldering more than your fair share, and starting tonight that will change. He distributed sealed envelopes to each of them, and for a moment neither Trent nor Carla spoke. Then Carla opened hers, her eyes darting over the paper, her breath catching, barely audible. Trent blinked. You serious? Dead serious, Jackson replied. You've been overlooked, and that stops now. Carla stepped forward. Are you going to do this for the other sites too? Indeed, Jackson remarked. However, I began my journey here because you all have faced neglect for such a long time. Trent rubbed the back of his neck. You stepped into this space working alongside us just to witness it firsthand. My faith in the information I received had completely eroded. I had to uncover the truth. Marvin rose from his chair, the envelope still sealed tightly in his grasp. You witnessed it, he instructed. Now don't forget it, as Jackson met his gaze. I won't. He stayed for the next few hours, not as a boss, not as a visitor, just as someone who finally understood. He helped move a few boxes, tightened a loose bolt. On a shelf talked with Carla about her nursing classes, asked Trent about the new forklift certification he was studying for, and when he left just before dawn, Marvin was still at his post, steady and alert. The building hadn't changed, but everything else had. 3 weeks had passed since Jackson's visit to the night shift. Warehouse 11 no longer felt like a forgotten outpost on the company's ledger. It now had a dedicated maintenance team, rotating through twice a week, a restructured night schedule, with proper coverage and a newly installed internal feedback system that didn't funnel everything through layers of approval before action was taken. But none of those changes mattered, unless they held. Jackson returned unannounced this time during the overlap between second and third shifts. The sun had set, but the lights inside the warehouse were bright, all of them functional. The cracked floor panel had been replaced. The pallet, Jack was gone, swapped out for 2 newer models, a laminated safety checklist hung in the break room near the water cooler, with initials marked from each day of the past 2 weeks. He spotted Marvin near the loading dock, clipboard in hand, talking to a younger man in a reflective vest. They were reviewing a restock procedure, the younger man nodding while Marvin pointed to a diagram taped to the crate. Jackson waited until their conversation wrapped up, then stepped forward. How's the new role? Jackson asked. Marvin didn't look surprised to see him. Busy, but it fits. I'm not used to people listening when I speak. You earned that, Jackson said. I know, Marvin replied. That is what sets it apart. I no longer need to demonstrate it each night. They positioned themselves close to the exit ramp as a truck reversed into the bay. Marvin's gaze tracked the motion. Ever observant, the younger man returned with a portable scanner and initiated the intake process without requiring guidance. His name is Elijah, Marvin noted, and he hails from Warehouse 6. He requested a transfer here upon hearing about the new leadership. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Voluntarily, it seemed. Word travels fast when things improve. Jackson nodded once, and shifted his focus to the far end of the warehouse, where a new supervisor's office had been established. The glass wall provided a clear view of the main floor, and inside a woman in her 30s was examining a digital dashboard. She glanced up briefly and waved when she spotted him. He reciprocated the gesture. Nadia Marvin doesn't merely remain behind the screen. She actively engages with her surroundings, walking the floor every 2 hours and carrying her own gloves. Last week I had a brief encounter with her. Jackson mentioned that she used to manage a fulfillment center for a non-profit and that this was the first time she had been granted full autonomy. Marvin remarked that she doesn't waste any opportunities. They made their way toward the rear storage racks, where Trent was instructing 2 new hires on lift operation. He glanced up as they neared and offered a brief nod. Jackson held off until Trent completed his sentence before he began to speak. "How's the training going?" "Better than I expected," Trent said. "It helps when they're not exhausted before the shift even starts. We're rotating crews now, so no one is working 5 nights in a row." Jackson observed that the lift had been recently serviced. A sticker near the control panel indicated that the maintenance log was updated just the day before. "Did you request that?" "No," Trent replied. Marvin flagged it, and Nadia approved it without a second thought. Jackson looked at Marvin, who simply shrugged. "I don't like waiting for something to break," Marvin said. "I've already spent many years watching things fall apart before anyone noticed." Jackson turned to the 2 trainees. Both looked alert, not from nerves, but with the quiet confidence of those who felt supported. He nodded at them and continued walking with Marvin toward the security room. The monitors had been upgraded, no more black and white fuzz. The new system displayed crisp footage from every angle, complete with motion alerts and real-time logs. A second chair had been added beside the desk, and Jackson noticed a printed schedule pinned to the corkboard. Marvin's new assistant, a part-time security officer named Denny, was covering 4 nights a week. "Is Denny any good?" Jackson asked. "He's still learning," Marvin replied, "but he listens, doesn't cut corners." "That's what matters." They stepped inside, and on the desk sat a company-issued tablet logged into the new reporting system. "You still keep the paper log?" Jackson asked. Marvin tapped the tablet. "I write it here now. It took a week to get used to it, but it saves time. Plus, Nadia reads every entry and sends notes back when she has questions." "That's the idea," Jackson said. "Accountability goes both ways." Marvin leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. "You came back to check if we slipped." I returned to verify the authenticity of the changes, and indeed they are. Marvin nodded once, deep in thought. He mentioned that he once believed the company was simply too large to show concern. He considered that perhaps this was just the price of growth, Jackson acknowledged, yet it doesn't have to be that way. Marvin observed him closely for a moment. "What caused your shift in perspective?" he asked. Jackson paused, reflecting before he responded. "I observed you attending to an event that went unnoticed by others, crafting protein bars at your own expense, and drafting reports that were never requested. It struck me that if someone like you could invest so much effort without seeking acknowledgement, then I could certainly achieve much more with the recognition I receive." I already had. Marvin didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the small fridge beside the desk, opened it, and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "Denny's idea," he said. "We rotate who stocks the fridge now. Everyone brings something. It feels more like a crew." Jackson looked around the room. It was still utilitarian. Concrete walls, metal shelves, fluorescent lights. But it no longer felt neglected. It felt lived in, maintained, respected. "You ever think about retiring?" Jackson asked. Marvin sat down, placed the sandwich on the desk, and looked out the glass toward the warehouse floor. "Not yet." He expressed a desire to see this through, ensuring it remains impactful. "It's going to happen," Jackson remarked. But I understand the foundation you've created here. I didn't build it alone, Marvin said, but I made sure the foundation didn't crack. They sat in silence for a moment as the steady rhythm of the warehouse continued around them. The soft whir of lifts, the beep of scanners, muted voices trading instructions, all of it ran smoother now. Not because someone at the top demanded it, but because people on the floor were finally being heard. Jackson stood. Up, I've got to visit another site tomorrow, but I'll be back in a month. Not undercover this time. Marvin gave a short nod. You won't need to be. Jackson walked to the exit, passing by Carla near the packing station. She was showing another employee how to organize the outgoing shipment logs on the tablet. She caught his eye and gave a brief wave, not hesitant, not forced, just acknowledgement. He stepped outside into the cool night. The parking lot was better lit now. The security camera above the door followed his movement as it should. Everything was in place, not perfect, but right. And for the first time in a long while, Jackson Fuller didn't feel like he was running a company from behind a desk. He sensed that he was at the forefront of one,